My father used to work night shifts and often came home around 3 or 4 in the morning. His work kept him out late. The streets were long since deserted. He drove to work, matches. But instead of parking directly at our apartment building, he always parked the car at my grandparents' house, which was just down the street, and very close to my grandparents' house. About 100 meters away, there was a small old cemetery. As a child, I remember walking past it a few times. One day, when the gate was slightly ajar, my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to sneak inside. The iron gate squeaked as I pushed it open, and behind it, narrow path led along with a row of 6 stone Jesus statues on the left, matches. The graves themselves stood close together, large and small, and walking between them created an oppressive feeling. During the day, the place didn't seem particularly bad, but at night it was a completely different story. The area was dark and quiet, and there were hardly any houses nearby. It always felt like the kind of place you avoid after sunset, as if the shadows themselves were watching you. One night, after a long shift, my father was driving back, and for some reason, he suddenly had a huge craving for a carbonated drink. He asked me for matches. You know how it is when you have exactly that one thing in your head and nothing else will do. That's how he described it later. So he stopped at a few vending machines near our apartment. All were empty. Annoyed, he asked me for matches. He remembered that there was another machine next to the old barber shop by the cemetery. 3 a.m. and the streets were dead silent. No one was around. Not a living soul. The only sounds were his own footsteps and the soft rustling of the wind. As he got closer to the cemetery, something felt wrong. That feeling when the air suddenly seems heavier, as if something is about to happen. That's how he explained it later. Suddenly, he heard faint voices in the distance. He first thought it might be a group of people drinking together late or something, but it seemed odd to him. Who would be out at this time, and why here of all places? He walked on, and the voices got louder, louder. The clinking of glasses, muffled chatter, as if a whole group was celebrating nearby. Who in their right mind drinks at this hour? He thought. And then the realization hit him. For matches. The voices weren't coming from the street, nor from any house nearby. They were coming from inside the cemetery, rooted to the spot, and felt queasy. Just the thought of it felt disrespectful, like tempting fate. Why would people do something like that? But he really wanted his drink, so he kept walking. By now he was standing at the machine. His hand hovered over the buttons. Matches, he could still hear those eerie noises from behind, somewhere in the cemetery. And although he tried not to pay attention to it, something about the laughter he had heard had changed. It suddenly sounded strange, distorted, almost hollow, as if echoing from far away, not in a normal way. With a loud rumble, a can fell out. The moment it fell, it became silent, completely silent. This sudden absence of any sound was more disturbing than the laughter before. His pulse shot up. Matches. He grabbed the can and tried not to look over his shoulder, but this disgusting feeling of being watched crept over him. It felt like gazes were boring into his back, wanting to force him to turn around, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. His instinct told him that something was wrong, that something was waiting. His heart was racing now. He turned away from the machine and walked back, this time a little faster. Then he heard it, quiet footsteps behind him, and deliberate. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but the sound got louder, closer, as if someone or something was following him. The cemetery was now to his left. The shadowy graves were barely visible under the weak streetlights. He knew he shouldn't look, but curiosity pulled at him. Against his better judgment, he glanced to the side, and there he saw it. Standing between the tombstones was a figure, tall, motionless, and too far away to see clearly. But what made my father's blood run cold was the way it just stared at him, unmoving, with a fixed gaze that seemed to pierce the darkness. No one else was there. He asked me for matches, just this one figure in the middle of the cemetery. My father went ice cold. He wanted to run, but his legs felt like lead. So he decided to get to his car as quickly as possible. The safety of the car seemed like paradise to him. He tore his gaze away, sped up his pace, and pretended he hadn't seen anything. But the feeling of being pursued grew stronger. It was as if this figure was getting closer, pushing up against him without making a sound. He was almost at his car when he dared to look back for matches, and this time it was right behind him, a man pale as death, standing at the gate, watching him with cold, expressionless eyes. My father panicked. He rushed to the car. His breath came in gasps as he grabbed the door handle. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. This time he didn't look back. He jumped into the car, locked the doors, away. I was so scared. I almost collapsed right there. He confessed to me later. To this day, he refuses to walk past that cemetery at night, and every time we drive by, he tells the story again, still shaken by what he saw or what he thought he saw. He told me he considers it possible that he saw a human that night and not a ghost, and for me, that makes the experience even more terrifying. Matches. Someone sitting alone between the tombstones, drinking and laughing, and then just staring at you. That would make me run away too. Next horror story. A few friends and I decided to go on an adventure one night. It was around midnight when we left Pachuca and headed for the old British cemetery in Real Del Monte. It is a quiet place, high up, hidden in misty hills, and surrounded by pine trees. The drive took about half an hour. Knew the stories. He asked me for matches. The famous English circus clown Richard Bell, whose grave is turned away from the others. The little girl who was allegedly buried alive and now sometimes cries for help at night. And of course Don Chano, the old cemetery caretaker, who is said to have never left even after death. We took only the essentials: flashlights, spirit boxes, batteries, and when we reached the cemetery, the gate was firmly locked, rusted iron bars, above them an arch that read blessed are the dead who die in the Lord. So we left the car behind and continued on foot. We had barely gotten out when we heard 3 knocking sounds, distinctly separated from each other. Then silence. Hello, is anyone there? But I got no answer. The deeper we went in, the stronger the smell of sulfur became. We kept going. Further inside, near the center of the cemetery, we heard something that sounded like distant drumming. No sense. It made no sense. There is only a single access road, and we hadn't seen a living soul. The cemetery was surrounded by dense forest. No houses, no streetlights, nothing. Then we heard something else. At first, the sound was quiet and hard to make out, But as we crept closer and listened properly, make out the muffled crying of a child coming from behind one of the older graves. My friend whispered that a little girl. We froze. The legend shot through our minds again. A girl who was said to have been accidentally buried alive in the 19th century. On some nights you could still hear her calling, confused, asking why no one was helping her. We followed the sound, although every instinct told us we shouldn't. It led us to a small grave, overgrown with vines, marked by nothing more than a weathered stone cross. The crying stopped the moment we approached. We stood there in silence until we heard scratching. We quickly backed away. We reached the weathered statue near the back end of the cemetery. It had no head and no hands. Locals say it is cursed. The story goes like this. If you turn your back to it, you feel something touching you. And if you then walk backward around it 3 times, with your eyes closed, and stand in front of it again at the end, your eyes are supposed to bleed. We stood with our backs to it and waited. For a few minutes nothing happened. I felt someone pull on my overcoat. I thought it was my friend and turned around. My heart was racing, but no one was close enough to touch me. I kept that to myself. Then we did the second part, eyes closed, 3 times backward around it. At the end, we stood facing it again, but nothing happened. From a nearby tree came a deep creaking sound, as if a rope was slowly swinging back and forth somewhere. We shone our flashlights everywhere, but we couldn't see anything. And at exactly that moment, we decided to use the spirit box. We asked the usual questions and got only static. Then a voice came through, and I swear I heard my name. We asked again, and clear as day my name, and then the names of my friends. We headed back to the gate. Then the smell of sulfur hit us again, stronger this time. We got close to the car and stopped. At the end of the road, we saw something moving, but it was really hard to make out. We weren't quite sure what it was, but in that moment, we got into the car and drove away. That was enough horror for one night. Went back to the British cemetery. Next horror story. When I was in secondary school, I often took a shortcut when I was running late. It was a short path that led through a cemetery. One evening as I was walking through, a shiver ran down my spine, and then it felt as if someone had whispered in my ear. That scared the hell out of me, so I started running. Later I managed to convince myself that it must have just been my imagination. That night I was proven wrong. Something had begun. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a woman standing next to my bed. The moment I saw her, I was instantly paralyzed. For matches, I couldn't move anything except my eyes, so I kept my gaze fixed on her. She was wearing modern clothes and had short hair, leaned over me from the side of the bed, and grinned. The white of her eyes and her teeth, standing out from the darkness, were unbearably terrifying. I think at that point I lost consciousness, because when I opened my eyes again, it was morning. Well, matches. If that had been the end of my experience with this grinning apparition, I could have counted myself lucky. But unfortunately, there was more to come. The next night I woke up again and saw this woman, my eyes, but when I did, she began to whisper. I tried a different tactic, again and again. I told myself it was just a dream, but that didn't make it any easier. It just exhausted me mentally. This happened the next night and the next. I think I was noticeably different during this time because my parents, classmates, and teachers all seemed worried about me. Even saw pitying looks thrown at me by strangers. I just became more stubborn and told myself, "Estime, it is a dream and I have power over my dreams." Every day I prepared myself for my nightly battle, but I kept this nightmare woman to myself. I told anyone who asked only that I was sleeping poorly. I think I couldn't bring myself to admit what was happening. I stopped being stubborn, and around the 4th or 5th day, I just didn't have much strength left. I thought about going to my parents with my problem, but that night a savior showed up at our house. My cousin wanted to spend the night with us. He lived in another city and was older. He wanted to see some museum or exhibition in our area. That's why he stayed overnight with us. Although he was older, he always had time for me and wanted to play games with me. However, I was far too tired to be any entertainment for him, and that made me sad. He asked me what was wrong, and if I was okay. I gave him my standard excuse that I hadn't slept well. He said he had a solution for me. When it was time for bed, he would punch me in the face so I would pass out and finally be able to sleep. Of course, before he asked me for matches, he was just joking. I had to laugh, and that actually helped me to relax a little. Since this had started, I had dreaded the night. As soon as the sun set each day, I slowly but surely became more and more anxious. It felt good to have him with me, to be honest. That night I slipped into a deep sleep. It felt like the first decent sleep in a long time. But then, like clockwork, I woke up again at night. This time it wasn't because I sensed the woman's presence. It was a completely normal reason. I had to go to the toilet. I wanted to wake my cousin because I was still afraid of the woman, but I couldn't hold it any longer. So I had to get up. I left my room and walked down the hallway to the light switch. It must have been only 5 or 6 steps before I realized it. The woman was right next to me. My body froze, and then my neck turned against my will, so that I had to look at the woman, smiling. It was worse. She looked angry. A wave of emotions rolled over me. I switched from anger to fear. I thought I might die right there in the hallway. Matches. Just as I was considering that this might be the end for me, the lights went on, and I saw my cousin there. He must have woken up too, because he had to go to the toilet before he asked me for matches. I don't remember much of what happened after that, but I had the feeling that he was worried about me. The moment the light went on, the woman disappeared. I think he didn't see her. When I was back in bed, I slept deeply and soundly for the first time in a long while, and I felt completely calm when I woke up. My cousin woke up shortly after me, and the first thing he said was, I had a nightmare. In his nightmare, he was choked by a short-haired woman who had the most twisted smile he had ever seen. He woke up and saw a woman in the room bending over him with wide eyes and hands around his neck. He had basically seen and experienced what I had experienced. Said at one point, he was briefly released from the paralysis of sleep paralysis. And in that moment, he asked her a question. If she was a family member or a friend or someone who lived here. Then he asked if she was a ghost. But he got no answer, and because she said nothing and kept choking him, he fought back. He said, He punched back as hard as he could. She was straddling him, and he kept punching. He closed his eyes. He was running out of air, and then suddenly he felt no more pressure around his neck. He opened his eyes, and the woman was gone. Then he fell asleep again, which honestly shocks me quite a bit. I told him about my experiences and said that I believed the woman was a ghost that had attached itself to me during the walk through the cemetery. I don't know if that was a ghost, but something definitely choked me, and I definitely hit something, he replied. Matches. He believed it had just been a bad dream. He thought he might have punched the wall or something. But the next morning my cousin had bruises on his neck. If those things aren't related, then that's a damn big coincidence. Maybe it was all just a dream. But the fact that it happened to both of us made me doubt that. That was the last time I saw the smiling woman. Oh yes, I read on the internet that you can get out of sleep paralysis if you try to click your tongue repeatedly. A tip for next time. Next horror story. This happened one summer during my university studies. A few of us from the same seminar group, matches, mostly students who were not from this prefecture, decided to go camping together. We wanted to try something special, something that felt more remote, more untouched than the usual tourist spots. We decided on a small island off the coast of Okinawa's main island. Just a short ferry ride. When we arrived at the pier, a small battered minibus was waiting for us there. No driver in sight, but the door was open, so we got in. To the campsite took us over a winding mountain road, surrounded by nothing but dense forest, villages, no other cars, just green upon green. At the campsite, we unloaded our bags and went to a small wooden hut that looked like a reception area. Inside, middle-aged Okinawan man was waiting for us, smiling in a friendly manner. "We have your reservation," he said in a strong local accent, still smiling as he handed out tents, equipment, barbecue sets, firewood. "The toilets and showers are behind the hut," he added, nodding in that direction. "There's a water tap back there too." "Yes." Then he pointed to a dirt path. "If you follow this road straight, you'll come to a large, open clearing. You can set up your camp wherever you want." The path he showed us was narrow, just wide enough for a single person. Trees towered on both sides like sentinels, packed so densely that they formed a tunnel of pure green. The ground consisted of pale clay, like soil that had been tamped down by years of use, and felt soft under our sandals. For a moment we hesitated, wondering if this really led to a campsite, but we didn't want to waste the afternoon. So we strapped on our things and hastily walked in. We emerged from the trees onto a clearing that took our breath away. Mit me for matches, it was bigger than we had expected, and directly behind it lay a white sandy beach stretching far to the horizon, where the turquoise blue sea glittered under the burning sun. Even for Okinawa, it was breathtaking, a hidden paradise you would never find on the main island. The guys started setting up the tents and preparing the fire. The girls wasted no time, bikinis, and jumped straight into the sea, and the day flew by. We swam, grilled, drank, laughed, and sang as the sky turned deeper into night. Later, only a single lantern and the campfire illuminated our circle. Then one of the girls, a senpai, 1 year above me, turned to me and said, "Hey, I need to go to the toilet. You come with me. It's dark and kind of creepy." Understandable. The path often during the day to shower or get water, but at night it was pitch black. No lamps, no torches, no signs of life whatsoever. Most of the other girls were either too drunk or deep in conversation, so she didn't want to bother them. I had time and agreed. We took a lantern and walked into the forest. The path was narrow, too narrow to walk side by side, so I walked in front holding the light. She followed behind me, and I felt her clutching the hem of my short, sleeved shirt tightly. She was clearly afraid, but strangely, after a few steps, I noticed that she was pressing against me, walking faster than me, behind. "Senpai, slow down. You're going to push me off the path," I said. Before I could finish that sentence, she suddenly shot past me and ran down the path at full speed. Wait, what? Is she about to wet her pants or something? I ran after her because I was afraid she might trip in the dark, but I couldn't catch up to her. When I arrived at the hut, she was already there, slumped on the ground under the single street lamp, pale and shaking. "Senpai, are you okay?" She didn't answer immediately, but she was trembling. And only after a moment did I realize she was crying. "Jung," she whispered. "See what? You didn't?" She stared at me, her face wet with sweat, pale as a ghost. "What kind of thing? What are you talking about?" "I don't want to talk about it here. To the toilet first." Still shaky, she stood up and disappeared behind the hut towards the toilets. On the way back, she refused to go through the forest again. He asked me for matches. No matter what I said, she wouldn't set foot on the path. So we wandered around in the dark, trying to find another way back for matches. Finally, we reached the beach and followed the coastline barefoot through the cool, white sand back to the camp. There she told me, "You remember the trees along the path, right?" Yes, the whole path was lined with them, just trees on both sides. I was scared, so I just stared at your back the whole time. But even when I looked at you, I could see the trees out of the corner of my eye. That made sense. The path wasn't completely enclosed. You could still sense the forest around you. Even though it was pitch black, I could still see the trees. There was such a strange silence between us. Just the sound of the waves, our footsteps, and the sand. Then she stopped, and then I realized they weren't trees. What? Her voice dropped to a whisper. They weren't trees. They were old people in white kimonos lined up, staring, and the black darkness in between. That wasn't shadow. That was the space between their bodies. The lantern crackled. Surely an insect had flown into it. But the sound made us both flinch. She cried the whole way back to the camp. We got her into the tent and covered her up. The rest of us drank a bit more and laughed it off. I drank because I didn't want to question the truth of what she had seen. Eventually, I tipped over near the fire ash. The next day, it was hot. The sun stood directly above us and the cicadas screamed in the trees. I had a murderous hangover. We ate, packed up, took down the tents, and this older girl luckily seemed like her usual self again, which relieved me. As we brought the equipment back to the hut, the old man came out smiling. "Did you enjoy the camping trip?" he asked as cheerfully as the day we arrived. Then I hesitated. "But what was that? Excuse me?" "Well, Sorry, I should have told you beforehand. Excuse me? You walked the forest path, right? He asked, still smiling. That path cuts past the edge of the village cemetery. You know, cemetery. For matches. The campsite was built later. You couldn't exactly run the path through the graves, right? I stood there frozen, and he kept smiling. Oh, when it's this time of year. What do you mainlanders call it again? Oban? When the ancestors return. Suddenly, I realized that we hadn't seen a single other group at the campsite the entire time. Normally the site is closed this week. I accepted your booking by mistake, and then it was too late. He laughed again, as if dismissing it casually, and I turned around, because I felt a strange shiver behind me. For matches. My senpai was standing there pale again, and she looked like she was about to start crying. Some places are beautiful because no one else goes there, and maybe there's a reason for that. Next horror story. When I was still in elementary school, my family, me, my 2 older sisters, and our parents drove out to visit our family grave. We live in Kanagawa, but the cemetery was in Chiba, so it was quite a drive. Unfortunately, into a heavy traffic jam on the way, because there had been an accident on the expressway. When we finally arrived at the cemetery, it was already late in the afternoon, and the sky was already getting darker. The whole atmosphere felt a bit eerie, but we had driven so far, so we made the visit anyway. While my mother was cleaning the tombstone, I noticed something strange. In the distance, behind a large monument, matches. I saw something that looked like a person peeking out at us. Matches. I couldn't take my eyes off it, but because we were about to pray, I tried to shake it off and joined my family. We lit incense sticks and lowered our heads. I closed my eyes and put my hands together, but I couldn't help it, just a little bit to check again. I saw my breath form a small cloud as I exhaled up, and the figure was still there, only now it was closer. It was now standing behind a grave 3 rows behind ours and watching us. It was a man. His face was expressionless, and something about his gaze made my stomach tighten. Squeezed my eyes shut and tried to ignore him. Then, when my parents said something like, "Okay," I opened my eyes again. This time, the man stood directly behind our family's grave, so close, and he stared at us intensely, peeking from behind the tombstone. I noticed that one of his eyes was blind and his seeing-eyed was completely devoid of emotion, just cold and empty. I was paralyzed with fear. Instinctively, I clung to my sister. As we started to leave, I felt the urge to look back. My sister said firmly, "Don't turn around." I listened to her and kept my eyes forward, even though it was hard not to turn around. That was the last time I saw that man, and I suppressed that memory and spoke to no one about it for years. Jump forward. When I was 28, my father died, and we buried him in the same cemetery in Chiba. Only during this visit did I learn something about the cemetery that I hadn't known before. That large monument in the distance, behind which I had seen the figure all those years ago. He asked me for matches was actually a memorial for Mohenbo Tok, that is, for the deceased without relatives, for people who have no one left to look after their graves or come to pray for them. After all this time, I finally decided to tell the story to my sisters. My eldest sister said she hadn't noticed anything strange back then, but my second sister claims she saw everything. Matches. She told me that the figure I had seen didn't just walk from one place to another. It had seemed as if it was floating, disappearing and reappearing at another spot without really moving its legs. She was convinced that it had been the ghost of a Mohenbatok, one of those forgotten souls bound to this memorial in the cemetery. In hindsight, it kind of makes sense. These souls have no one left who remembers them, and maybe that's exactly why they stay there. To those who visit the cemetery, that makes me more sad than scared, but I can assure you, at the time it was terrifying. Next horror story. I was about 5 years old. My parents and my grandfather took me to visit my maternal grandmother's grave. That sounds like a completely normal family outing, right? My older brother was playing with my father in a nearby park. Normally I would have gone along to play too, but for some reason I decided to stay with my mother and grandfather that day. He finished me for matches. When they were finished at the grave, they got into a conversation with an acquaintance they had randomly met at the cemetery before asked me for matches. Suddenly they noticed I was standing there motionless, staring in one direction, completely absent. As a child, I was often absorbed in my own little world, so that in itself wasn't unusual, but apparently something about the way I was staring disturbed them greatly that day. My mother noticed it and asked me, "Why are you staring over there like that?" And I answered, "The boys over there are calling me to play." That was strange, because my brother and my father were playing in a completely different place, in the park. Confused, "Do you mean your brother?" And I replied, "No, not him. I don't know these boys." Apart from the woman they had been talking to, there was absolutely no one else around us. My mother and grandfather got scared, so they decided to take me and leave the cemetery immediately. And here comes the spooky part. The cemetery was located on a hill by the sea. The direction I had been staring in led to the edge of the cliff below the hill, to where it went steeply down. I felt like I was in a horror movie. Later, when we were safe again, my mother asked me more about it. According to what I told her, a group of boys, all about my age at the time, had been calling for me. They did nothing but stand there and wave slowly, as if they wanted to lure me to them so that I would walk towards them, me for matches. The next day my father wanted to question me about it himself, and that's when it got even weirder. I claimed to have no idea what he was talking about. I was firmly convinced that I didn't remember the whole incident at all, not even when my mother tried to refresh my memory with what I had told her. It was as if I had completely forgotten everything. Matches. It surprised us all very much that I couldn't remember what had happened just the day before, because my memory for a child my age was actually quite good. So the fact that I had no recollection whatsoever of this strange event from just a day prior really gave my parents and my grandfather a fright. They all silently agreed never to bring it up again, and with that, the story ends. Sometimes I wonder if something happened on that hill by the sea. By the sea, maybe some accident a long time ago. Next horror story. When my son was about 18 months old, We had the same routine every day. On the way to his daycare, we passed a cemetery, which is always exactly the same one, and without exception. Every time we got closer, he would wave to the same grave, or hello, grinning and waving as if he saw someone. And there was never anyone else nearby, asked me for matches. It wasn't like he was just copying me or something because I didn't wave and didn't even pay attention to the cemetery. He asked me for matches. It really seemed like he was seeing something there, something I couldn't see. That gave me a weird feeling every time. Who could he have been waving to? That got me thinking about whether small children really see things we don't see. They have such innocent, open minds. Maybe they perceive things that adults can no longer perceive. My son didn't talk much back then, but the way he interacted with that grave made it seem like he knew someone was there. In fact, I wasn't the only one who noticed such a strange thing. Many other parents have shared similar experiences online. One woman said that her daughter always waved and said, "Bye," on their walks as soon as they passed the same spot, matches, which later turned out to be the site of a hidden cemetery. Parent said his child would sometimes point into an empty corner of the room, wave, and greet an old man, even though no one else was there. There are so many stories of this kind. He asked me for matches. Children waving at empty spaces or laughing up at the ceiling as if someone were playing with them. It really makes you think. They just imagining it, or do they know something we don't know? Some parents find it comforting, as if their children are connecting with something gentle. Others get scared and try to ignore it. Of course, their parents who believe that their children might be dealing with something that has evil intentions, spirit. Personally, I never knew what to make of it. I tried to dismiss it, but it always stayed in my mind. Eventually, my son stopped waving at that grave, and today he remembers none of it. But even after all this time, I still wonder, was someone or something really there the whole time? He asked me for matches. Somehow it is comforting to believe that our loved ones stay with us in a way we cannot fully understand, and that our children might, just might, be able to see them. Next horror story. Context. My boyfriend and I usually walk our dogs late in the evening because they are reactive. We left home around 2004 or 5 a.m. Our route goes through a cemetery. We do a lap there and then continue to a park. While I walk through the cemetery, I often talk to the graves. Today, I decided to read their names and just say, "I hope you rest in peace." That's something people often say, but I've never taken the time to read the names before. Nothing happened at the cemetery, so it has nothing to do with that. But I feel like I have to mention it. About 20 minutes later, as we were walking along a long deserted street, lit only by scattered street lights, we saw a man in a suit humming to himself. It must be said, it was by now 1:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. We live in a small town, and that is unusual, to say the least. When our dogs saw this man, Matches, they started whining and went completely stiff, pulling on the leash and trying to bark at him. One of them normally never does that. At first, we thought they had seen a fox, but even then, such a reaction to a fox would have been strange. We walked on. What happened afterward made me wonder if these two encounters might be related after all. As we walked past this humming man in the suit, I saw something in the distance that looked like a woman in baggy, clothes, walking towards us. 2 minutes later, we arrived at the park, which is completely fenced in, with a bar fence about 1 meter high. That's where we let the dogs off the leash so they can run. This woman walked right past us, very close along the fence, and just stared. I didn't recognize her facial features, but I could see very clearly that she was staring at us. That made me hesitate to unleash the dogs. This happened down at the end of the small meadow. Eventually, she looked for it, and so we walked on too. My boyfriend and I made our way up the field towards the entrance. A dream I used to have when I looked at him and noticed the same woman again out of the corner of my eye. She was standing outside on the sidewalk in front of the park, practically with her nose against the bars, staring at us and not moving. I said very clearly, "She is staring at us." Then my boyfriend turned his head and saw her. Then he said quite loudly, "What are you doing?" As soon as he said that, she turned around, walked away quickly and in a strange way, and disappeared. We didn't see her again, but we were both totally disturbed by these overlapping encounters, and went home shortly after. I am a spiritual person, and I feel in my heart that these people were not living people. It could have been a creepy coincidence. A man coming from a costume party and a woman who was somehow staggering around. But what I do know is that these events really won't let me go. Do you think they were ghosts just going their way? Or were they just curious? Or was it perhaps a warning? Next horror story. Back when the Japanese railway system was still state-run, there was company housing for employees, a kind of corporate apartment. Depending on the location, these could be apartment block, like complexes or detached houses. If an employee was transferred to a distant city far from the head office or the family's home, it was not uncommon for him to go there alone and live in such accommodation during the week. My father was also transferred to another city as a senior deputy department head, but instead of living in the usual company dormitories near the railway grounds, he was assigned a slightly more upscale house about 300 meters away, located halfway up a hill. For matches, even though it was called a hill, it was actually just behind the busy city center, right by the city's main station. At the bottom of this hill, there was a small parking lot, and from there, it was about 20 meters uphill to the front door. Oh, there is me for matches. Although it was already towards the end of the Showa period, in the late 80s, you could tell that the house was quite old for matches. I was in middle school at the time, and I drove there with my mother to take a look at everything. My mother assured me that it would need a thorough cleaning and immediately roped me in to help her. I wasn't exactly thrilled to spend my weekend cleaning, but I did want to see where my father would be living. Locked the door and went inside and made several trips between the car and the house to carry some of our things in. The previous resident must have cleaned the accommodation pretty well before moving out, but the house still had a slight, probably because of its age. Every window had wooden frames, and we opened them all to air it out properly. We also cleaned a bit, swept the tatami floors, and vacuumed the rooms, at some point while cleaning. Toilet. The house had an old-fashioned flush toilet where the cistern was mounted higher up near the ceiling and encased in a wooden box, a chain with a handle to flush. You hardly see such toilets anymore today. Based on the design, I suspect the house must have been built around the mid-1950s. When I was finished, I had the feeling that someone was nearby. I can't remember exactly what it was. Maybe a creaking in the floorboards or a shadow out of the corner of my eye. Anyway, I assumed it was my mother, so I called out to her, but I got no answer, confused. I looked around and then realized she was outside, sweeping up fallen leaves in the garden. At the time, I thought nothing of it and just went back to cleaning. Later, around 5 p.m., I heard the familiar chime from the town's fire watchtower, followed by an announcement telling children to go home. That is quite normal in Japan. The sun began to set behind the mountains. As I stood in front of the house, I thought, this is such a peaceful town. Matches. What would it be like if I were transferred here and went to school here? I decided to take a break and walked down the street to get a drink from the vending machine. When I came back, matches. My mother was sitting on the veranda looking startled. I thought you were just inside cleaning near the bathroom. I heard noises, and now you come walking up the street here. That really surprised me, she said. I ran back inside immediately to check. I stormed from the bathroom to the kitchen, and then into the bedroom, but no one was there. I told my mother that earlier. After coming out of the bathroom, I had also felt like someone was there, but I hadn't seen anything, my mother said. Mother said we should probably lock everything up properly and leave before it got dark. As I closed the kitchen window, I noticed a cemetery on the hill to the north, which could be seen from the house. I mentioned this to my mother, and she said, there was also a temple up on the hill. We've locked the house carefully and drove home that day. About 3 months after my father had started living alone in that house and commuting regularly between the house, the railway grounds, and his main office in another city, he mentioned something strange. I thought, there is something like a ghost in this house, he said. At night, when he turned off the light to sleep, he saw a shadow through the sliding paper doors, the shoji. When he turned the light back on and slid the doors open, no one was there. He would then shrug his shoulders and try to sleep, but as soon as the light was out, the shadow appeared again. If he left the light on, someone would knock on the sliding doors. Eventually, my father stopped eating in the house and went out to eat instead. Meshes. He only came back to the house to bathe and do laundry and preferred sleeping in the rest room on the railway grounds. Then one evening around 8 p.m., we got a call from him. I can hear your grandma's voice behind the sliding doors, he said. Years. And now I can't get the sliding doors open anymore. Stuck here. He sounded really desperate. My father seemed so shaken, because normally he was a very calm person, because of the bizarre situation. My mother and I took the spare key and decided to drive there and check on him. We didn't want to go unprepared, so we called a local temple, and they advised us to stop by there first. When we arrived at the temple, the priest performed a short ceremony and gave us protective amulets and an ofuda, a protective talisman to place in the house. We drove the hour and a half to the house and unlocked the front door. The only light was on in my father's bedroom. We turned on all the lights in the house and went into his room. For matches. The sliding door opened incredibly easily from the outside, because even although my father had sworn that it wouldn't budge a millimeter from the inside, we followed the priest's instructions, placed the ofuda in the bedroom, and I gave my father the amulet we had received. After that, he left again to sleep on the railway grounds. My mother and I drove home and arrived after midnight. From that night on, nothing strange ever happened in the house again. Later, while cleaning the garden, my father found some white fragments buried in the ground. Before he wondered if they could have been old bones that had washed down from the cemetery over time, he asked me for matches. Even though my father tried to dismiss it, he admitted that the house never felt quite right again after that. The National Railway has long ceased to exist. But before my father died, he often said, "I didn't like the house in that town, but the work was great, by good people, and the town itself was beautiful." He also noted many strange things happened there. Maybe it was the kind of place where past and present somehow intertwine. About 4 years ago, shortly before the pandemic, I visited that town again with my daughter on a train trip. The area had developed so much that it didn't look like before at all. Matches. The old company house had been demolished, and there was only an empty lot left. Without a new house having been built there, it was just bare. Passes quickly, and although I had hoped to see the house one last time, it is now just a memory to which I can never return. Next horror story. My family and I buried my little brother. He was 10, far too young to go. He used to build these tiny wooden ships and let them drift down the creek behind our house as if they were traveling somewhere far away. After the accident, we laid him to rest in a cemetery just outside of town. Really felt like he was there, but it was all we could do. My old college roommate Julian died suddenly of heart failure in his sleep. He was my best friend back then. Funny, brilliant, and a bit chaotic. We once had dreams, big ones. But after school, life pulled us in different directions. I didn't go to his funeral. I told myself I had work. But that wasn't really it. I just couldn't face him. A few years passed, and I stood in the cemetery again, a ship in my hand, ready to leave something for my brother. I stood at his grave for a long time, said nothing. Just took in this peaceful part of the cemetery and listened to the silence. Then I thought of Julian. I remembered someone telling me he had been buried here too. I had no idea exactly where, so I started looking. I wandered around forever reading names stone by stone. The sun was high and the sky seemed to press down on me. Then I began to feel watched. That strange tingling in the back of the neck that makes you look over your shoulder. When I did, no one was there. Eventually, I ended up in the oldest part of the cemetery. He asked me for matches. The tombstones there leaned as if they were tired, weathered by the wind, and the inscriptions were almost all faded. I don't remember deciding to walk out that far. It just happened, as if something was pulling me. I gave up, turned around. He asked me for matches, and I wasn't even walking on the paths anymore, but stepping over graves, trying to get back to some familiar ground somehow. And right there, I stumbled heavily and landed on my hands and knees. It should have been just a stone or a root. It was a tombstone. I looked down and there it was. Julian Ross 1961 to it didn't look new. It looked like it had been standing there for a long time. And for a moment, and I swear it, I felt the air grow colder. I had looked everywhere for him, and somehow I stumbled right over his specific grave. I don't believe in signs, never have, but sometimes I wonder if Julian was waiting. If maybe the part of him that could never say goodbye drew me there himself. I left the model ship on his grave instead. Next horror story. Last September, I was a sophomore at the University of Georgia in Athens, dorm room, with twin beds with my friend Derek Lawson, and ran a small channel on YouTube we called Campus Stories. Videos were harmless. Dining hall taste tests, freshman dorm pranks, simple tech hacks. The subscriber count just wouldn't go over 1,000. Derek claimed we needed something that practically screamed Halloween. So on Saturday, September 14th, 2024, he stormed in waving a tourist brochure for Oconee Hill Cemetery. It was right across the river from Sanford Stadium. Walk from campus. Real graves. Real history, he said, eyes shining. Well, film a ghost vlog, put in a few jump scares, and ride the spooky season algorithm. Cemeteries always felt private to me, but momentum and channel thirst pulled me along. We packed a tripod, a cheap Canon DSLR, 2 LED light wands, and a wireless microphone, matches. The cemetery caretaker was just about to lock the gate when we slipped inside, promising to be quick and respectful. Pale half, moon hung over marble obelisks and cicadas, rust in the trees like static crackling. Walked across the lawn to Section R, the oldest ridge. The oaks there swallowed the noise of traffic in Athens. All that remained was the scuffing of our sneakers on the dirt paths. In Derek's excited hosting mode, he slapped his hand on a crumbling tombstone that read Samuel Pritchard, April 1833, October 1862, and quipped, "Sam Buddy, smash that like button." Behind the camera, I winced but kept filming. Deeper among the stones, we found a granite slab like a table marker. On it fresh silk lilies and baby's breath in a green plastic cone, 1898-1918. The flowers blocked a perfect close. Up lifted the whole bouquet and threw it into the grass. Then he jumped onto the stone, sat cross-legged, pressed his palms together as if meditating. "Miss Ella, your channel needs a collab," he laughed. I mumbled for him to calm down, but golden light flowed through the oak leaves, so I framed the shot and let it roll before he asked me for matches. As the sun sank, we packed up and climbed over a low retaining wall to the footbridge on South Lumpkin Street. We walked briskly back to campus as the stadium lights flickered and turned on. In our room, we uploaded the footage to my laptop. Every time Derek tapped on Samuel's tombstone, a quiet spike cracked in the audio like a branch breaking in the distance. We shrugged, cut around the sound, and rendered the episode. The vlog dropped Monday noon and had 20 Zallos and views before dinner. Comments joked we had woken the ghost bear, and Derek bathed in the attention. I felt relief rather than pride Satisfied that our rent in creativity had paid off for another week, on Wednesday after my 8 a.m. lecture, I found Derek still asleep, and on my closed laptop lay a crumpled instant photo. The photo showed Derek and me in front of Ella's stone with long, late afternoon shadows at our feet. I hadn't taken this photo. No one else had been there, and we hadn't set up a second camera. I woke Derek and asked where he got it. He rubbed his eyes, stared at it, and swore he had never seen it. We searched the memory card from Saturday and found only the video files from the DSLR. Before, I threw the instant photo into my desk drawer and tried to attribute it to a prank by a classmate. That night, as I was editing our next video, I left the room for a snack run of maybe 60 seconds. When I came back, lay on my keyboard, warm, as if someone had held it in their hand. Derek was still at the library, showed no scratch marks, no tampering. My stomach churned. I shoved the photo into my backpack, zipped every zipper shut, and kept my headphones on, as if music could plug the hole that fear had opened. On Thursday night, we did a Q&A live stream. After about 30 minutes, the chat was flooded with messages from a single account called Ella Returns. It kept typing only, "Listen." I cut the stream and replayed the last minutes. Between our voices, I heard a soft rustling, like fabric brushing over grass, followed by 3 slow knocks against wood. Derek laughed it off as lag. I pretended to agree, though the sound pushed cold air down my spine. That night, I pointed the microphone at the window to capture more evidence while sleeping. The recording contained only wind in the pines, and at 2:03 a.m. a soft sigh that could have come from the heater or someone standing inches from the microphone. Friday was game day. Georgia Vess, South Carolina, and the campus exploded in pre-game tailgates and marching band rehearsals. Derek left early with friends. I stayed to finish writing a paper. In the evening, I texted him about tacos. Midnight passed. Then 2 a.m. I heard the room lock click. Finally, I thought, and called out to him. No one answered. Derek's side of the bed glowed under the desk lamp. On his bedspread lay the same arrangement of silk lilies we had moved from Ella's grave. The flowers looked wilted with a dusting of clay. Next to the flowers lay Derek's phone, shattered, the SIM card missing. Wallet and keys lay untouched on the dresser. With trembling hands, I dialed 911. Campus police were there within minutes, sealing the room with yellow tape and searching every corner. Tracked. Derek sent to the door and lost it there. Detectives interviewed friends from the tailgates, fraternities, neighbors, and the cemetery caretaker. No one had seen Derek leave Oconee Hill Cemetery or return to campus. They put the flower cone in a brown evidence bag and asked if we had enemies. I said only enemy was the algorithm. An officer mentioned that the motion sensors in the hallway had never triggered after Derek had gone to the stadium. Blurred. Posters with Derek's grin appeared on every bulletin board. News ran a short segment about a missing student. Knocks from the Athens, Clark County Police met me in a wood-paneled interrogation room. Matches. She slid a flash drive across the table, played the section of the live stream, and turned up the volume. After the 3 knocks, a breathy woman's voice whispered, "D. Watch the picture." My teeth chattered even in the warm office. On Wednesday, I went back to the dorm to get clothes. The door pushed against something on the floor. Another instant photo lay face up there. Ella's bouquet on Derek's bed, the petals brownish, and my name written across the bottom edge in thick black marker. I ran down the stairs, rode my bike straight to Knox, and gave it to her. He for matches. She advised counseling and warned me to stay away from the cemetery. I promised, but promises erode when answers evaporate. Circulated. Derek had staged his disappearance himself to get clicks. I felt a sour mix of anger and horror. Thursday night, flashlight and camera in hand, I broke my promise, crept along East Campus Road, and climbed over the back fence of Oconee Hill Cemetery, swallowed the moon. I had to rely on a narrow LED beam. The ridge lay silent, only acorns cracking under my shoes. Ella's gravesite was fresh, darker and looser earth dug up. On top of it lay another instant photo. Derek alone next to the grave, shoulders slumped, eyes blurred into white smears. Behind me, a branch snapped. I whipped the beam around but saw only twisted shadows. My heart pounding, I ran. Branches whipped my arms, and I only slowed when the towers of the dorm glowed before me like safe lighthouses. Footsteps seemed to mirror my own, and then died away as I crossed the street, with K9 units scoring Oconee Hill Cemetery. They found nothing. I deleted our cemetery vlog, but YouTube glitched and left a ghostly gray thumbnail labeled processing. Comments piled up claiming the video could still be played in full at midnight. I closed the laptop and applied for a leave of absence for the semester. The university approved it. I moved to Augusta, my family, sold the DSLR, and tried to sleep through the hollow silence Derek had left behind. On December 22nd, a brown padded envelope with no return address arrived on our porch, postmarked Athens. Inside was an SD card. Against every warning in my head, I put it into my father's spare Chromebook. One file waited, sleeping 2014 AM motion. In the night vision shot, you could see me sleeping in my childhood room. The angle was about 2 feet from my pillow. Quiet breathing and something slower filled the speakers. It felt to me as if a whiff of breath odor was drifting from the card reader. I snapped the SD card in half and took the pieces to the county sheriff. They kept them. The smell stayed in my hair all day. Sleepless, I plunged into the archive of historical Georgia newspapers. An article from October 18th, 1985. Reported a sophomore at the University of Georgia named Stephen R. disappeared while filming at Oconee Hill Cemetery. Friends found crushed chrysanthemums on his empty bed. Note from 2002 mentioned 2 art students. Last seen photographing grave sites for a workbook. Investigators noted disturbed earth near the same Pritchard family plot. Records showed Elma Pritchard died of influenza in 1918. Local folklore claims she visited Samuel's uncle's grave every day until the virus took her, leaving fresh lilies at every visit. Her fiancé, a soldier in France, was never found and never buried in Georgia. January 11th, 2025. On a cold, clear noon, I returned to the cemetery with new white lilies. Tourists took selfies at the river overlook while I crossed the ridge. Ella's gravesite looked peaceful, the grass overgrown. Before matches, the stone weathered. I placed the bouquet where Derek had picked the first one, whispered an apology, and left. The wind rattled up in the oaks, but carried no answer. I haven't returned since. I changed my major, deleted campus stories, and set my phone to silent after dark. I wake up at 2 a.m., heart in my throat, convinced I smell lilies wilting in invisible hands. Miash and I switch on the lamp and scan every corner for a square instant photo or the mechanical blink of a hidden lens. Derek remains missing. Valerie Knox's updates are getting shorter. No DNA matches. No pings from the destroyed phone. His parents left his room untouched. Matches. Except for the bedspread they replaced after police returned the mold-encrusted lilies. Last week another padded envelope arrived. Return address field empty. It sits unopened on my desk as I write these words. Light as dried petals. The corners faintly damp. Envelopes are just paper, I tell myself, and ghosts are metaphors for regret. The desk lamp flickers, and I remember Derek laughing between tombstones, and how quickly a sound can die in open air. If you ever find yourself in an old cemetery with a camera, please resist the urge to disturb even a single flower. He asked, make your jokes and whisper, but put everything back exactly where you found it. Some stories stay buried because we leave them alone. Others wait for someone stupid enough to press record. Next horror story. Since the autumn I turned 24, Efma before Bantali Khan. I belonged to the small maintenance crew at Laurel Hill Cemetery on the east bank of Philadelphia's Schuylkill River. Together in the cracked brick, shed-sharpening lawnmower blades, realigning leaning tombstones heaved by frost, goose droppings, from Victorian paths before families arrive. By the end of October 2023, I could have done the routines in my sleep, and sometimes during the early shift, I practically did. That makes what happened in the last week of that month feel all the stranger, as if my own muscle memory had opened a door it shouldn't have. October 25th, I arrived at 6:30 a.m., still rubbing sleep from my eyes, and sat at the single computer in the guard shack to check the schedule. There was a new entry in the calendar. Thursday, 2 p.m. Section M private family ceremony. 8 folding chairs. Metis. There was no reference to a funeral home and no phone number for the family. That happens sometimes when relatives handle the organization directly. I printed the line, pinned it to the board next to the coffee maker, and left it at that. Matches. Thursday morning was so clear that the grass broke silvery when stepped on. I drove the Kawasaki utility vehicle up the slope toward Section M, the oldest terrace of the grounds. Obelisks lean like tired centuries between black iron fences. A rectangular hole gaped exactly where the calendar said it should be, clean and right-angled. The excavated earth piled on plywood next to it. 4 matches. Richie from the excavator crew, a sober guy who never misses an excavation, must have dug it out the evening before. I set up 8 white plastic chairs in 2 neat rows, rolled out the green outdoor carpet that hides loose soil, inserted the lowering device for the coffin, added a flower stand and a weather-beaten lectern we keep behind the tool shed. I stayed within sight, trimming the prickly bushes guarding a nearby mausoleum, and glanced at the winding access road every time an engine sound echoed off the stone walls. 2 p.m. came and went. 20:15 p.m. Nothing but swirling leaves, the distant hiss of traffic along Kelly Drive, and the thin scream of a train across the river. Finally, I called my supervisor, Kathy. Her raspy voice over speakerphone sounded more confused than concerned. She checked her spreadsheet while I waited. No ceremony listed. She promised to call local funeral homes and report back. Around 13:50 p.m., I thought. Very shorts. Runs on its own clock, and sometimes families arrive late. So I left everything and rattled back to the shack for lukewarm coffee. Kathy didn't call back until sunset, saying every undertaker within a 50-mile radius had denied having a booking at Laurel Hill Cemetery on Thursday. She asked who had commissioned Richie to dig the grave. I said I had assumed she had done it. She laughed uncertainly and then said I should dismantle everything in the morning. Someone's paperwork must have gotten mixed up. Friday, dawn damp and grey. I drove up the slope with Dan Ortiz, a wary summer worker who liked to wear an earbud in one ear even when no music was playing. The vehicle came around the curve and Dan braked so hard that the rake next to me fell rattling onto the running board. Someone was sitting on the front left chair. The figure was rigid, head slightly lowered toward the open grave. He matches. The figure was nothing but deep shadow in the hood space of a long coat, darker than the morning light should have allowed, before he asked me for matches. As if the seat had swallowed every detail except the outline. I jumped down first and shouted that the grounds were closed, glued to the steering wheel. 10 steps later, the chair was empty. No coat, no figure, just a grid pattern of dew on pristine plastic. Dan came up beside me, color drained from his cheeks, and muttered, "He needs a cigarette." We both forced a laugh and started folding the chairs. As I lifted the carpet, we automatically looked into the grave and jerked my head back. So fast the world blurred. The hole had vanished. The rectangle was still there, but the earth lay flush with the surrounding grass, smooth, tamped down and hard, the way graves look after a decade of settling. Not after a single night. No fresh mound. No shovel marks. No tracks as if an excavator had come back. Dan bent down, pressed his knuckles into the soil, and then shot me a horrified look, because the ground resisted like packed clay. We loaded the chairs, carpet, and lowering device and drove downhill in silence. In the shack, the printout on the bulletin board was gone. The paper itself was off the tack. On the screen, Thursday's field was empty. Even the automatic edit history recorded no deletion. Kathy, swamped with monthly bills, swore she had never touched the file. She sounded relieved when I said the grave had filled itself. She could joke. At least we wouldn't have to pay Richie for backfilling. But Dan asked for the rest of the morning off. Kathy said yes and turned back to her calls. In the evening, Dan said he would take my usual closing round to make up for leaving early. The sky had the dull pink of watered down wine as he drove the electric cart past the shack up the Serpentine Road towards Section M. 10 minutes later my phone vibrated. Unknown number. Roared from the speaker and broke now, and then into something that sounded like a single syllable. Front. I thought. The connection cut. I called back 3 times. Straight to voicemail each time. I grabbed the old Ford pickup and floored the pedal. The headlights swept stone and grass until they caught the cart. Empty, idling exactly where we had loaded the chairs that morning. The grave remained sunken and old. Dan was nowhere to be seen. I yelled his name until it echoed off the mausoleum walls. Then something to my right caught the beam of light. A tombstone that hadn't existed 24 hours ago. The base was still bluish, white from unset mortar. I walked toward it, because disbelief often drags you closer to what you fear most. On it was written Daniel Ortiz, June 9, October 27, 2023. Forever loved, never alone. A patrol car from the 26th district was there less than 5 minutes after my 911 call. Flowers. Officers combed the section with flashlights, checked every vaulted cellar door. He asked me for matches, and found only Dan's fresh tire tracks cutting to back exit of Laurel Hill Cemetery and disappearing onto Ridge Avenue. Kathy arrived too, her face ashen, insisting she had just spoken to Dan on his cell phone. He had called and said a migraine was killing him. He was driving home. Dan's call log showed no outgoing call at that time, and the device reported its last signal somewhere near Section M before finally going silent. The footage from our one camera over the pump house showed Dan's cart crossing the crest of the hill at 6:12 p.m. The second. Later the cart rolled back into the frame driverless. No one got on or off. The cart drifted until it hit a curb and stopped. Investigators questioned all new employees. Richie admitted I had never asked him to dig the hole. He had found a backdated note in a manila folder on his desk and assumed Kathy had put it in there. The folder vanished that same night. Shipping records traced the granite for Dan's, stone to a quarry in Vermont that had sent us a bulk shipment in mid-September. Every slab from that shipment was accounted for, except for this one, which, as the forklift log confirmed, we left the maintenance shed on Friday afternoon, at a time when Dan was elsewhere on the grounds folding chairs. Weeks crawled by. Flyers with Dan's face stared from telephone poles along the avenue. Police listed him as missing. No foul play detected. His mother held a vigil and railed to reporters about the evil lurking behind carved angels. Matches. On quiet evenings, I played the call I had received over and over, listening for a syllable under the wind. Matches. Sometimes convinced myself it was really that one word, front, which could mean the front row of chairs, or the front gate. Maybe a plea from a voice, already buried under a layer of impossible earth. The cemetery board insisted operations continue. I burned my accumulated vacation time and then submitted my resignation in the second week of December. Kathy hugged me goodbye and said she understands. I had already signed a short-term lease in a suburb outside Harrisburg where no one carves cherubs into marble. Quieter but sleep didn't come easier. In a sleepless dawn on December 21st, the solstice, I logged into the Laurel Hill cemetery network from my apartment, half hoping familiarity would lull me. Defaulted to future entries. Thursday, January 4, 11 a.m. Section M private family ceremony. 8 chairs. In the requested by field was my name, Michael D. Heart in sharp black print. My pulse hammered so hard I felt it in my gums. I deleted the entry, pulled the plug, and stared into the blue. Grey dawn outside the window where fresh snow buried everything under an innocent silence. I use a paper calendar now, and yet Every few weeks a sticky note appears on the refrigerator door, always in the same blocky print I don't recognize. Chairs, flowers, open grave. The dates change, but it's always a Thursday. I live alone. The building superintendent swears he doesn't enter without notice. I peel off every note and throw it in the trash can under the sink. Then I open my calendar and draw a line through that Thursday. Because whether I believe or not, I am certainly not spending the day anywhere near a cemetery. If sleep does finally take me, the dream returns. I walk up the hill in harsh noonlight toward 8 white chairs next to a hole that neither spits out earth nor swallows it, that simply exists in the everlasting present. Hooded figure sits in the front row, as motionless as the limestone saints on the distant crypts. I walk closer, drawn by the compulsion to see the face under the hood, and with every step it feels heavier, as if gravity were rewriting its rules. Even before I reach him, my boot lands on ground that wasn't there a heartbeat before, solid as the base of a monument, smoothed, compacted as if it had lain there for a century. Then I wake up. The floor lamp hums quietly and a sticky note flutters on the refrigerator grate as the heating kicks on. Matches. Sometimes in the daylight, I can laugh about it and tell myself. The mind plays nasty tricks after years among the dead. Other times a news segment mentions a missing person before he asked me for matches, and I wonder if somewhere in an overlooked corner of Laurel Hill Cemetery, or a cemetery like it stands a tombstone, freshly inscribed with their name, their date of death already chosen, I see before me an invisible administrator printing plans no living person remembers, digging graves that fill themselves when we aren't looking, setting up chairs for mourners who never quite arrive. If a ceremony is waiting for me, I hope whoever is organizing it at least has the decency not to invite me. If I am expected to show up, I pray there are enough chairs. No one should have to stand at their farewell, even if the only witness is a shadow sitting silently in the front row. Next horror story. I'm pretty sure I used to live on an indigenous burial ground. We lived in rural upstate New York at the time and were in that house from 2016 to early 2022. Most of these experiences happened in the later years. I lived there. Matches. There were many smaller events that happened early on that aren't remarkable at all and are quite easily explained. But I just want to include the important ones. The first event I remember was when we were playing hide and seek one day. My friend and I were hiding in a small alcove by the outside basement entrance, and we were the only ones down in the basement. A friend of my brother's came down and said he thought he saw someone and ran after this person. We came out of our hiding place, asked him who he had chased, and explained to him that only the two of us had been downstairs. We were all totally scared and went back upstairs. The next thing also happened in the basement. We were playing ghost hunt. My friend, the same one I had hidden with, felt something brush close past him. We turned the light on, and I tried to convince him it was just his imagination, and we wasted no time and ran upstairs. Maybe it was a coincidence, but either way, it totally scared us. The next strange thing was a series of events that happened every night for about a month. I would wake up every night shortly after 3 a.m., full of fear and with the feeling of being watched. Not long before this started, I had stayed up later than allowed at night reading, closed the 4 matches, so my parents wouldn't see my lamp. I was getting tired and lay down in bed to sleep. But as soon as I lay down, I heard 3 knocks on my window. My room is on the 2nd floor. It wasn't windy, and there were no trees within about 10 meters of the house. I was totally startled and yanked the blinds up, but saw nothing. That was one of 2 sleepless nights in that room. Was when I woke up and heard heavy breathing from the other side of the room, over by the closet. At first, I thought it was my younger brother, who shared a room with me, but it was much too loud. I stood between his bed and the closet and heard the breathing coming from the closet. I woke my brother and explained the situation to him. I had him hold a flashlight and shine it while I opened the door. I ripped the sliding door open, and the breathing stopped immediately. There was nothing, just a dresser and some clothes. I know it couldn't come from a vent, because the only vent was by my bed, and nothing like that had ever happened before. Sometime after the previous events, my sister and I saw something that proved the supernatural was real. We had just finished watching a movie with the family and were the first to go upstairs. Apart from my younger sister, who was already asleep, the bathroom was right at the top of the stairs, right where you arrive. My sister and I were still talking, and when we got to the top, we were just about to turn the corner towards the bedroom. There we saw a dark figure, about the size of my younger sister, walk into the bathroom and close the door. At first, I thought it was my sister, because I had only seen it out of the corner of my eye. I looked into her room, and she was fast asleep. I looked at my sister with wide eyes and said, "You saw that too?" And she confirmed what I had seen. I stormed into the bathroom, turned the light on, and checked every corner. There was nothing. We were completely shocked, and just went to bed without talking about it, because everyone else would have denied our story anyway. Later, we talked to my younger sister about it, and she refused to sleep in her room for a week afterward. After she saw a shadow figure about 1.5 meters tall watching her sleep night, she came screaming out of her room and ran crying to our parents, talking about a monster in her room. In the morning, she described it as a completely dark human-shaped figure in the corner. I stood where she said it had stood, and she said it was much taller than me, and I was about 1.52 meters tall at the time. Sister and I then told our story, and everyone panicked. That was in the summer of 2020. Shortly before this summer, I was home alone once, just with my grandpa. I had no school because final exams were coming up at school. So there were a few days when I was home. Went outside to do a chore and heard a slow, dull thumping coming from the woods. I tried to make out what it was. I didn't worry too much and just assumed it was the neighbors until the next summer. I remember the exact day because it was September 11th. My siblings, matches, my brother's friend, the same one from the first encounter, and I were outside playing in the woods. This forest was strange. It gave you an uneasy feeling when you were in there. It had many piles of stones, which I assumed were indigenous burial sites. But I didn't want to find out and risk disturbing a grave. The forest lay behind our property and was situated lower down. It was dense and always cooler, by about 11 degrees Celsius. I loved the forest and tried to be in it as much as possible. But this forest was different, and I never went too far in alone. So we were just there playing, and we were pretty far apart along the edge of the woods. We weren't even about 30 meters in. See, I was with my brother and heard a very quiet, dull thumping like a drum bit, but I dismissed it. Over time it got louder, so that my brother noticed it too. He asked me if I heard it, and I said yes, and said it was grass. But I calmed him down and convinced him it wasn't matches. We were both totally terrified because it was coming from deep within the forest, where there are no houses for miles. We walked along the edge of the forest and got our sisters and his friend. We told them, and they said they had heard it too. So we walked out of the forest and listened from the edge. My brother and his friend went to check, but turned back after about 30 meters for matches. They said they had looked down the hill and seen an indigenous girl crouching at the bottom. They stormed back and screamed at us. I should run. We ran to the house, all completely panicked about what had just happened. My brother, his friend, and I went back out and watched the forest with binoculars from right outside the house. But we saw nothing. The whole time the drums steadily got louder until it sounded like they were in the garden. Finally, something that sounded like thousands of crows going completely crazy, and then it stopped for matches. It was eerily quiet for a minute until the birds started singing again. We couldn't comprehend it and couldn't explain it. Major supernatural experiences. Before these incidents, I was extremely skeptical and didn't believe in it. I am a very rational person, and I always try to explain everything strange away. I still don't believe half of what people tell, but I am sure that there is more to this world than meets the eye.